there's a fire drill for the council at 11 a.m. this morning. So if they're speaking, we may hear it.
Right. Okay. One more little obstacle to overcome. Right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30 and the examination hearing for day 3 of the hearing into the Mid Sussex Site Allocations DPD is now open. My name is Mike Fox. I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination into the soundness of this plan. Can everybody hear me and can everybody see me? I'm hoping that there are virtual nods on that. It's being recorded on YouTube. And when people speak for the first time, rather than going around the room right at the beginning, I'll invite you to just say who you are and who you represent. There'll be breaks at around 11ish for, or just after, for coffee or whatever. There'll be a lunch break from 1 o'clock to 2. And if we're still going in the afternoon by 3:30, we'll have another break about then. A couple of extra things. One is that there is going to be a fire drill at the council offices at 11 o'clock. So we may hear those, or if the council is speaking at that time. And also this question about exiting. Clearly, a number of you have got very important appointments elsewhere, or including childcare, but also civic duties, etc. And I'm just saying, feel free to exit at whatever time you need to do so. I don't want to stand in the way of that. Just in some housekeeping matters, that the 2 pieces of information which I asked for yesterday. The first in relation to matter 3.1 on the implementation of the strategic sites. I've asked for an updated tables of the 4 strategic sites in Mid Sussex, hopefully in the form of a statement of common ground. I know that Judith Ashton and I think Andrew Black are willing to work with the council on this. But if anybody else wishes to as well, then please contact the council. Mr. Brown, Paul Brown QC, indicated that he would let me know by next Thursday on progress or otherwise on that. And then second,
can I just intervene there, sir?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'll find my camera. There we are, I'm back. Can I just be clear what we're looking for, sir? Because what Judith Ashton asked for was a statement of common ground between us and the promoters of the particular sites. So, for example, Homes England and the developers. I hadn't realised or appreciated that what was being talked about, and I don't think Judith Ashton was asking for a statement of common ground with her as a participant. I think what was suggested was that once we come up with that they would have the opportunity to comment on it to you, which of course is entirely right. If I've misunderstood that, or if you would like something else, then could you please let us know now, because it puts a rather different complexion on what it is that we need to do.
No, I understand what you're saying. It was my understanding. I don't know, is Judith Ashton with us? I can't see her on the list.
She's not here today. Not today.
Not here today. Right. Could you, Charlotte, sort of ask Judith whether she understood that she was to be part of a statement of common ground on this? If that creates problems with the council, I'm quite happy for us to go down the route that Paul Brown is suggesting, whereby the council and the promoters come up with a statement and then we have a week for other people to comment on that. I'm very happy with that. In fact, I think rather than
obviously we can reach common ground with participants, and we'll do that. But I'm just conscious that we can't even begin to have that conversation with them until we've got a measure of agreement with the developer. We've got a joint statement from the developers as well, and that might just push out the timescale for being able to do it. So we may, in fact, not be in a much better position than if we start out with a statement of common ground with the developers, and then you allow time for third participants to comment on that. And what will appear from that is the extent to which they agree or disagree with what we suggest is a reasonable trajectory. So
I'm happy with that suggestion, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, sir. That's very helpful. I'm sorry.
We'll go along with that. So in that sense, Charlotte, if you could just say to Judith that that's what we're going to do, and obviously Judith and all the other participants will have the opportunity of commenting, and I'll give a week, as I normally do, from the receipt of the council's statement to other parties being able to comment on it. And the second thing I asked for in relation to matter 3.4, which is the 5-year housing land supply, I asked for an update in the form of a worked table. And again, my understanding is that Paul Brown couldn't guarantee this, but he was going to come back to me on the 10th of June, and we'll see where we are in terms of progress. Have I got that one right, Mr. Brown?
That is absolutely correct, sir. We're working to that. We're still hopeful that we can do that.
That's helpful, thank you. Just finally, I still am not in a position where I can say one way or the other whether I will produce an interim statement. Obviously, a lot will depend on these two documents and whether I feel, and further discussion that we have down the line at this hearing, as to whether I feel I need to go down that route or not. But I will keep people informed accordingly. I would like to welcome Andrew Griffith MP to our company this morning. His time is limited, and in a minute I'm going to invite Mr. Griffith to make a statement on behalf of his concerns and his constituents. And also like to welcome South Downs National Park here. And again, I know that at least one of the team there has a limitation on their time this morning in relation to, how can I put it, COVID health matters. And then also, I'd just like to begin with Andrew Black. Is Andrew Black here?
I'm here, sir.
Good morning, Andrew Black. You weren't around yesterday afternoon. I understand that there were some technical problems that you were experiencing. There were one or two in the team who felt it might have been childcare, but we won't go into that.
No, apologies. My network went down in the last 10 minutes. I heard everything up until the last 10 minutes, and by the time I got it restarted, everyone had gone home. So it's most upsetting. I did have a listen. If I can just clarify on our additional allocations, and I think that was the question.
That was the point, yes.
So my client has an emission site in Haywards Heath, and I was intending, sir, just to make some comparisons with that site in Rogers Farm, SA21. So I was going to make those at that session, and I thought it might be more appropriate to do so at that point. And then in relation to Felbridge, my client owns land adjoining SA19, and it is within the settlement, will be within the revised settlement boundary, but we were going to make some statements to you that maybe that's a potential for an additional allocation next door to that. So I was going to make those points at those relevant sessions.
Right.
That would be better.
Can I suggest that first of all, I invite Andrew Griffiths to speak, because his time is very limited. And secondly, to invite South Downs National Park to make any comments they want to make at the outset. How long are you going to be here for, Mr. Black?
I'm here all day, sir. There was one very minor bit of matters arising that I wanted to deal with from something yesterday that was just a point of clarity.
Yeah, go on.
So it's just on the housing delivery test. Very quickly, I'm conscious of other people's times. I gave you some figures on housing delivery test, and I realised that the figures I gave you were the previous year. The figures Mr. Brown gave you were correct, so I apologise for that, sir. They were put forward, and there was actually an uplift. I did double check, so that's just to sort of set out for your notes, sir, that there isn't any disagreement on that. I concur with what Mr. Brown was saying. It was just an error from my part on that. So just wanted to put that down. Thank you.
Thank you for your openness and helpfulness on that. So I think without more ado, unless I've got any more procedural comments from anybody, I'll invite Andrew Griffith MP to take the floor, as it were. Mr. Griffith.
Thank you very much, Inspector. And I'd like to thank everybody engaged in this process. It's a well-meaning and important and thorough process. And so thank you everybody for the time that you are putting in. I'm speaking today in my capacity as the Member of Parliament for Arundel and South Downs. The Mid Sussex District Council is one of 4 districts that fall within the parliamentary constituency. And I speak particularly in support of the communities of Hassocks, Sayers Common, Kemah and Hurstpierpoint that both fall within the district boundary and would be impacted by some of these proposals. I'm speaking today against the inclusion of sites SA12 and SA13, and I would like to associate myself fully with the submission to the Regulation 19 proposal made by SOFLAG. It's a group of over 1,000 local residents, many of whom I'm the parliamentary representative of. In my view, it's a thorough and cogently argued document, and I would draw the attention of the inquiry to that, which, as I say, has my full support. In the interest of time, I will be brief, so I'm speaking at a high level today, but there are 4 key points that I would like to make. We're all in favour of sustainable development. We need the homes that the nation needs. We need to accommodate growth in a part of the world that is in high demand. But that growth should be sustainable. And ultimately, the acid test of a plan is its sustainability against a number of criteria. Whether the local infrastructure, by which, sir, I mean the local schools, the capacity of the local healthcare system, the local transport infrastructure can accommodate the scale of development in a particular period of time. And I think both SA12 and SA13 fall on that criteria on many counts. One of them is the context of the significant development that is already in flight. Sites like Clayton Mills that are currently under development, and where I see, and my constituents regularly contact me about the challenges of school places, of access to GPs, to NHS dentistry, and the congestion that we already see on our roads. That's my first point. My second point is that this site is very close to the national park boundary. I am a strong advocate of the South Downs National Park Authority. It is a significant national resource, and it is a resource for everybody that lives in this area. One of the sites runs as close to the boundary as 150 metres, and the sites themselves contain a unique set of biodiversity that, notwithstanding the well-meaning and best efforts of any developer and the government's objectives to improve biodiversity on large-scale development sites, it is not my belief that biodiversity can adequately be replaced as part of the development. We're talking about ancient field systems, certain red list species, as well as the overall amenity of the national park. And I've said previously, we cannot have a national park that resembles Central Park Manhattan, with development right up to the boundary. And I would ask the inquiry to take that into account. I've talked about the transport infrastructure, and my third and final point would really be about the coalescence that we want to build communities. That is the organic approach to development. We are enormously blessed in Sussex by the strength of our communities. But if we allow those communities to coalesce, we actually destroy what makes people want to live there in the first place. And again, in respect of both of these sites, we would see very significant coalescence between Burgess Hill, Kemah and Hassocks to the south. So those are my key points. As I say, all of those have been well developed by SOFLAG in their written response to this inquiry. I'm very happy, Mr. Chairman, if you've got any questions that you would like to ask, but I would contend that we can meet the objectives of this exercise without those sites being included, and in the context of the very, very significant development that my constituents have already accommodated, and that is putting a very significant load on infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just really got one question. Thank you for the way you put that so fluently. But my question really would be that if we deleted something around 350 plus houses, if we deleted, or if those two sites were deleted, then we've virtually eaten into the buffer, which is 484. So you're well on the way to kind of just wiping that out. And I just wonder whether you had, with your local knowledge, whether you had any suggestions that I should take on board as to how I would compensate for that loss of housing.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very well-made point. My main point on that would be that the buffer, understanding that some buffer may be needed, is we should also take into account the commitment locally that I see to develop sites that are brought forward and included. So I think a buffer is a function of the probability with which other sites come forward and are successfully developed. We should also be aware of the broader context of a significant relaxation in respect of permitted development rights and a government that is very pro brownfield site development. So when we look at that in the round, we're not looking, I would contend, at a static landscape. What will happen in the future is not what will happen in the past. And those relaxations in permitted development that will aid and abet the creation of dwellings primarily from commercial and formerly retail sites, of which we are going to have a great many more in the future, means that we should end up developing more of the sites that are consented. My final point I would observe, and it's not for me to speak, I'm being very cautious because this extends beyond my parliamentary constituency boundary and there are strict conventions about that. But I did recently have the opportunity to visit Burgess Hill with my fellow Member of Parliament, Mims Davis, and it struck me that there is very significant opportunity for the creative redevelopment of Burgess Hill to build communities in an area that already has excellent transport facilities and indeed a town centre that, by my personal observation, would benefit from bringing community back into the heart of that town. So I'll stop there because I certainly would not want to speak beyond my brief, and I defer to your expertise, Mr. Chairman. But it is my belief that we have other good developable sites that can deliver this plan.
Thank you very much. If you just got a few minutes, sir, I just wonder whether there's anybody else in the meeting, in the hearing, that would like to make any comments. If there's not, then that's fine. And thank you very much. And feel free to observe for as long as you're able to. Constituents.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your endeavours in this important exercise.
Right. Thank you. Secondly, I wonder if I know the National Park have also got time limitations, or at least one of the group has. I just wonder if there's anything that the National Park would like to say by way of commentary on policies SA 12 and SA 13.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much. My name is Catherine Stewart. I'm a planning policy lead at the South Downs National Park Authority. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah, I can.
Excellent, thank you. So yes, we have got a few words we'd like to say on these two sites, SA 12 and SA 13, following on from Mr. Griffiths. So firstly, to begin, so through its designation as a national park, the South Downs National Park is afforded the highest levels of protection, and through the Section 62 duty in the 1995 Environment Act, all relevant authorities are required to have regard to the purposes of the national park. We are concerned that the proposed allocations hit SA 12, but SA 13 in particular, threaten to harm the setting of the South Downs National Park as they are currently proposed and currently drafted. When considering the setting of the South Downs National Park at this location, there are two main key matters that we'd like to raise here. So firstly are the shared characteristics of this area within which these sites sit with the national park. One example of this is the historic landscape character of this area. The second is the function of this area as a transition from the more urban and suburban Burgess Hill area into the more rural characteristics of the national park. And together, these mean that the site is sensitive to change. And these 2 points I've raised are set out in more detail on page 3 of our representation at the Regulation 19 consultation, and in the second paragraph of our examination statement, reference M4-777. We agree that the site is capable of accommodating some development, but we have concerns as to whether, the scale of the development, the number of units proposed for particularly SA 13 of 300 units, as to whether this can be accommodated in a way that responds to and avoids adverse impact on the setting of the national park. At this point, I would just like to make a reference to the proposed wording of the emerging MPPF, the draft changes proposed. In particular, the new wording in paragraph 175, which the new wording states that the scale and extent of development within these designated areas should be limited. And the new wording goes on to say, while any development within their settings should be sensitively located and designed to avoid adverse impacts on the designated landscape. We would be happy to work proactively with Mid Sussex, as we've referenced in paragraph 5 of our examination statement. We're happy to work together to identify the number of units that the site can be capable of accommodating, and we'd be happy to discuss that further. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for that. Is there anything you'd like to say now by way of what you consider would be a reasonable figure, or would you rather have that discussion with the council first?
I think we haven't done the piece of work to identify what the precise number should be. So I think we need to have those discussions and do a piece of work. There are pieces of evidence that have been prepared, which we could usefully use to inform that work. I would make reference to the SHLA and the capacity study that have been prepared for Mid Sussex. I would make reference to those, but that piece of work would need to be done.
Have you any rough idea whether that could be done within the next few weeks within my hearing timetable?
Potentially, yes. Yes, I think we would need to have that discussion with Mid Sussex, but potentially, yes.
That's very helpful. I just wonder if the council have got any response to this. Would you be able to spend some time in the next couple of weeks with the National Park to come up with a joint statement on the capacity of these sites? And this is one for Paul Brown or for Andrew.
So can I, it's rather difficult taking instructions on this at the moment. I'm conscious of the fact that at the moment, the density of this site is already, or the proposed density is already quite low at around 20 dph. I'm not saying no to be difficult, but I don't want to say yes if it's something we can't deliver. Can I, when we get to the mid-morning break, and it might be something that we can even discuss with South Downs National Park over the break and get back to you then. I mean, there's been a level of discussion and agreement between us and the park already. I'm not at the moment clear how much further we're going to be able to take things, but obviously if we can, we will do, particularly if it's going to help you, sir. Can you leave it with us and I'll come back to you with a more concrete answer. I'm just getting slightly quizzical looks from across the room at the moment, as if to say we're not quite sure what more we can do at this point in time. So that's something we can't deliver.
No, I understand that, and that's the worst thing you can do is promise something you can't deliver. So I will wait until the coffee break or just after, and then we'll see how we go. But if you can talk with the National Park as well, that will be very helpful. And thank you, Catherine Stewart, for your comments as well. Just coming back to the question 3.3, where we're looking at these individual sites that we're now going into and will be for the next few days. I set out a set of criteria in my MIQ list, and I'll just remind people of what they are, because I want that to be the kind of the framework for our discussion. But I'm looking for things like the willingness of the landowner to encourage development on the site, the potential safe and secure access, relationship to the neighbourhood plan if one exists or is made, any conflicts with national policy, significant infrastructure considerations, impact on living conditions, impact on the quality of the landscape, impact on heritage assets, is the location sustainable in terms of access to shops, facilities, schools, health, etc., transport implications, contamination of the ground, and any other material considerations. And so they're all set out under matter 3.3, but that I think is a helpful starting point on this. If I could just look at policy SA12, land to the south of 96 Folders Lane, which is for 40 dwellings. I don't know, very briefly, as I've done all the way through this examination hearings so far, is just summarise briefly what the parties have said who've written into to us. The council are stating that they've got clear ownership situation with a commitment to develop early on, that the transport assessment has been considered by the County Council Highways, who raised no objection, that the area is not covered by the neighbourhood plan, it's outside the urban area, which the council claims was the kind of the remit of the neighbourhood plan. There's no conflict with national policy, that there are no significant infrastructure requirements, no severe impacts at any of the junctions in the vicinity of the site. The majority of the site is at low risk from flooding. There are no what we call showstoppers, in other words, surprises which would knock the plan off the road. There are no significant impacts on the living conditions of neighbouring residents, no significant impacts on the quality of the landscape or the ecology, which can't be mitigated satisfactorily. It's remote from heritage assets, apart from tall chimneys that I'm sure we'll come on to. It's more than 20 minutes walk to shops, but the allocation will contribute to sustainable transport measures. Grace Machin for Burgess Hill Town Council and Soflag states that there is a conflict with the neighbourhood plan. The site's not needed by the district plan. There is no justification. There's a fundamental conflict with national policy. It harms all three strands of sustainable development. So the natural realm, the social realm, and the environmental realm. The transport implications are not robustly considered. The mitigation measures are poorly evidenced and inadequate. There's a harmful impact on the critical interface between the edge of the urban form of Burgess Hill and the national park. That it would irreversibly erode the integrity of the green gap. That it would basically knock out irreplaceable ancient farmland. There will be an imbalance of housing delivery in Burgess Hill as a result, which doesn't accord with the spatial strategy that's approved. And then thirdly, Andrew Black Consulting states that basically a landscape valuation impact assessment is needed to determine the impacts on the national park. And the site is remote from Burgess Hill services in the town centre. What I will do is just link it to SA 13. So I'd like to run the debate on both of them together. And that's for the land further to the east. It's a larger site for 300 dwellings, but they are fairly close to each other. And the council's view on that is that the owners, promoters intend to implement within the first 5 years. Again, the Highway Authority indicate no severe impacts on the highways network. That it's not in the area covered by the neighbourhood plan. No significant infrastructure requirements, no major flood risk, no significant impact on living conditions of existing residents. That the LVLAA concludes that the site is a low-medium landscape sensitivity, that there's no significant harm to the landscape, including the national park, that ecological mitigation is possible, that it is close to facilities and services and a 15-minute walk to the station. Pegasus Group for Persimmon Homes Limited and Thacum Homes, who have an interest in the site. Early delivery is realistic. They reckon that 300 dwellings could be implemented by 2027. The site is overgrown and inaccessible. There's safe and secure access and no significant infrastructure requirements, flood zone 1 and in a sustainable location. Denton Homes state there's substantial issues with deliverability and availability, and the site should be deleted until these can be adequately demonstrated. And Andrew Black Consulting that private parking areas would need to be removed to provide suitable access, substantial issues with deliverability and site availability, and want to know if any of this land would be required for playing pitches. So not a meeting of minds, as you can see, between the two major groups of people who've made comments. So thank you for those comments. And basically, I just want to open up now to comments from all parties. I'll start with the council as I usually do. Are there any kind of headline areas that Mr. Brown or your team would like to come out with first, or do you want to just hear other people first?
So I don't think there's very much. Ines, I mean, you've summarised very well our position overall. It's worth pointing out, and so you've got the details of this in our MSDC 02C site allocations DPD, the paper we produced for the purposes of today. A summary not just of the position, but also the extent to which it's underpinned by evidence. And in relation to SA 12, you will have noted that although that application was since withdrawn, there was a planning application submitted by the promoters of the site, which had with it certain pieces of information such as a transport assessment, drainage strategy statement, and so on. And so the document we've submitted indicates to you what work has been done, which underpins the sorts of conclusions that we've reached on deliverability, acceptability, ecological impact and those sorts of things. So the promoters of SA12 aren't here today, so if there are questions on that, ultimately it'll come back to the council to respond. The same thing in terms of information is also true of SA13, where the promoters of the site are here today, and I know Ms. Sargent in particular and her team are available to answer detailed questions. But it is worth stressing that in relation to SA13 as well, there's been a suite of information submitted dealing with really all of the issues that you've raised in your bullet points, and certainly answering those to the satisfaction of the council. So can I just say one thing in relation to both SA12 and SA13 in relation to the objection raised by SOFLAG, which is that the in relation to conflict with the neighbourhood plan. As a matter of fact, there is not a neighbourhood plan which covers the site of either SA12 or SA13. It was deliberately excluded from the site of the Burgess Hill neighbourhood plan. And so, in fact, this is not an area which is covered by a neighbourhood plan policy at all. Therefore, there cannot be a conflict with the neighbourhood plan to that extent. I think so. Just by way of introduction, you have said everything else that I would need to say. We've got a lot to get through, and I suggest we open the floor and let others chip in.
Thank you for that. So we will let others chip in, and I'll take anybody now who wishes to speak. Just raise your hand, use the facility we have, and do that. So, right, Dr. Ashley Bowes.
Yes, good morning,
Am I
sir.
pronouncing your name correctly, by the way?
Spot on, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, sir. As you'll recall, representing the Town Council and the Action Group, and with me is Mr. Grace, who I'll be bringing in on certain matters to answer your little Roman numbers, and also Mr. Roger New, who you won't have met, certainly in the context of this examination, and he'll be dealing with your little Roman 5 on transport and highways impacts. So that's just to foreshadow the team. We don't have any comments on little 1. I don't know how you wanted to, did you want to proceed so sequentially? You very helpfully said you were going to deal with the sites together, which is very much our preference, because as you'll appreciate, we've got a lot of overlap on points we want to make between 2, but we don't actually have any comments on little 1. So
Regard the Roman numerals as a framework for you to use for your convenience, really. But I really want you to come up with your arguments rather than looking at them as a kind of serried ranks that have to be knocked off one after another.
Fine. Thank you very much. Well, in which case I'll kick off then, if I may, on little 2, safe and secure access. We just had a small point of clarification, which perhaps the promoter can help us with on SA13, which is in the LVIA document SA 13.1. At Appendix F, there is an indicative layout. And on that indicative layout, it is shown that there's a potential for a pedestrian link to Folders Lane to the north. And we just like to know, please, if that's all within the control of the promoter, as it wasn't entirely clear on the documents that we saw, at least, whether that piece of land to deliver that proposed access link to the north for pedestrians is within their control. So that's our initial question.
Okay, is there an answer to that now, or do you want time to consider that?
Good morning, sir. Heather Sargent of Council, appearing for Thacombe Homes and Persimmon Homes, the promoter of SA13. Sir, I'll come back to you with an answer on that, if I may. I'm just, I think I know what the answer is, but I want to check with others who are in a better place than I am to provide that answer.
That's fair enough. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Right, Dr. Bowes, back to you.
Thank you, sir. So the next little Roman numeral that we wanted to address you on was the neighbourhood plan. And what I'm going to do is ask Mr. Grace, with your permission, to give his view on that. We accept, obviously, the factual position that it lays the sites, both 12 and 13, lie outside the boundaries of the neighbourhood plan. But we nevertheless say that there are relevant points that come from the neighbourhood plan as to how this piece of land functions. And I'd like to invite Mr. Grace to draw out those points for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Grace, welcome and good morning.
Good morning, sir. Hopefully it won't take too long, but just to repeat what's already been said twice, it is correct that the site or the sites sit outside of the neighbourhood plan boundary, but with all due respect to the council's representative, we still feel there is a clear conflict with the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan, as all plans, should be read as a whole, and we highlight initially on page 9 of that neighbourhood plan. It states that the neighbourhood plan recognises the strategic context by the MSLP and the MSDP, including the protection of countryside, and obviously I stress to the south and east of the town. And with regards to the same document, in paragraph 2.11, it very clearly states that in light of the allocation of these major development areas, the emerging district plan strongly protects the countryside to the west, and obviously our emphasis to the south of Burgess Hill. And being a planner, it's always helpful to have a look at a map, of which I'm sure that you've seen many leading up to these hearing sessions. But page 17 illuminates, I feel, the proximity of the South Downs National Park to SA12 and SA13. And specifically with regards to SA12, first of all, this arguably highlights the last significant gap or buffer site between the built-up edge of Burgess Hill and the boundary of the South Downs National Park. And I think, as you've paraphrased, we do genuinely feel that in the context of what the neighbourhood plan seeks to do, strongly protecting the countryside to the south of Burgess Hill, and it's explicit that SA12 is that critical interface that the neighbourhood plan outlines should be protected from new development to preserve the setting of the South Downs National Park. And similarly with SA13, one could arguably say that the impact on the setting of the South Downs National Park will be even greater in this location, arguably also in relation to the quantum of development that's proposed at SA13. The edge of Burgess Hill is most clearly defined along the northern edge of SA13. I think we'll come on to talking about the impact that will have in landscape terms in a bit, with regards to not a small number, but quite a large number of Burgess Hill residents. And the summary point is that this proposal would be a major incursion into open countryside. With SA13, there's no comparable, has been argued arguably with SA12 and the, we'll call it the Jones appeal site. We say, with all due respect, that yes, we acknowledge that it is outside of the boundary, but it would be in clear conflict with the neighbourhood plan, which seeks to protect the countryside to the south of Burgess Hill. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So those are our comments on the neighbourhood plan, Roman numeral of your agenda. So if you wanted us to pause at that point to see if there were contributions you wanted to hear on that point, that before we moved on, or we're very happy to move on, do all of our case and then hear everything from the other side. However you want most effective for you, sir.
I think it might be helpful for your kind of fluency, if I let you go through with all of your aspects of your case, and then we'll invite response from other parties to what you've said.
Thank you,
sir. If you and your team want to carry through on the agenda, then feel free.
Thank you, sir. We'll do that, and thank you for making that available. So just finally on neighbourhood plans, I should just draw your attention to, you'll be very familiar with it anyway, but paragraph 29 of the framework which sets out really the purpose of a neighbourhood plan. It gives communities the power to develop a shared vision for their area. Neighbourhood plans can shape, direct and help to deliver sustainable development by influencing local planning decisions as part of the statutory development plan. And we say, for the reasons Mr. Grace gave you, that this is a conflict with that shared vision as articulated through the neighbourhood plan. And one might take technical points about the fact that this is a site which is just about outside its boundary. That is a factual point, matter of public record where the boundary is. But plainly, the community took the opportunity to articulate a shared vision. And we say that the south of Burgess Hill was identified for as being particularly important by that community, and that should carry weight in this process. So if I can then move on to little 4, any conflict with national planning policy. First of all, to foreshadow this point, this is a coalescence point that we would like to make under this heading. And the starting point is para 127 of the framework, little d, which is that planning policies and decisions should ensure developments establish or maintain a strong sense of place. And that national policy objective is embraced within the district plan, of course, which we've heard a number of times this document is planning to meet within, at DP 13, which you'll find on page 58. And DP 13 has the policy objective of preserving the unique characteristics and identity of separate settlements, and is under the heading Preventing Coalescence. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite Mr. Grace again to give you his view as to whether SA 12 and SA 13 adhere to that objective or conflict with it. Mr. Grace.
Thank you. So the matter of coalescence is a significant one, particularly with regards to SA 13. It's already been mentioned by the Member of Parliament this morning. It's been referenced by Ashley Bowes this morning. DP 13 has preventing coalescence essentially derives from national policy, which seeks to prevent coalescence occurring, most commonly perhaps discussed when talking about sites in the green belt. But in plan form, the allocation of SA 13 would be bringing 2 settlements together, that of Burgess Hill and Hassocks, with Clayton Mills underway. This is a very different scenario to the development to the north and east of Burgess Hill. And the spatial function of the area would be downgraded if SA 13 were to be allocated and built out. And we'd respectfully say that when we're discussing landscape assessments don't relate, or they are not, a spatial planning analysis. And in that sense, this matter of coalescence is a significant one, as I say, particularly with regards to plan form. We will also make some comments with regards to national planning policy in relation to paragraphs 170 and 172, but we think that they are best made when we talk about matters of landscape. So the matter of, as I say, of coalescence.
You're slightly breaking up, sir. The last sentence I didn't quite catch.
Okay. I think it was simply saying that the matter of coalescence is significant. We will refer to paragraphs 170 and 172 in relation to national policy, but that will be
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, sir. So moving on to Roman 5, any significant infrastructure considerations, including vehicular access, traffic circulations, and highway and pedestrian safety. We've got 2 points under here. One is under the traffic circulation heading, and one in relation to SA13 in particular is under the infrastructure considerations heading. Turning first to traffic circulation, so you'll be very familiar with the policy in the framework at 109. Development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. So the only thing I'd like to lay emphasis on that wording is it's not asking whether the uplift by a particular proposal or planning application is severe. What it's asking the decision maker to decide is whether the residual cumulative effect is severe. So that means you could have a situation where the existing transport network is under severe pressure. A proposal adds materially, but maybe on its own terms, not significantly to that. But when you step back and look at the overall picture, accounting, of course, for proposed mitigation, the effects are severe. That's perhaps a spectacularly obvious point, you might think, but it's, in my respectful submission, often overlooked, and sometimes that point can get lost. So I hope you forgive me making that very straightforward point before bringing in Mr. New, who you will have received a statement from as part of our hearing statement from GTA Civils. Mr. Roger New, can you hear us? We're not in the same physical room, so hopefully he can unclip his camera and turn on his microphone.
I should be with you.
Yes, Mr. New, you can coming through loud and clear. So for the inspector, please, could you summarise?
Good morning.
Welcome to our assembled gathering.
Thank you, sir.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you want to just summarise for the inspector? Obviously, he will have read your statement, so don't feel you need to set all that out, but just summarise in headline terms the transport problems as you see them.
Yes, sir. Just introduction. I'm Roger New, project manager at GTA Civils and Transport, and we're advising SOFLAG and the Town Council on matters of SA12 and SA13. Principal issues cascade down from a very strategic level to a local level. As we've said in our statement to you, sir, a strategic level, we believe that the mitigation strategy put forward by the District Council is critically dependent upon the delivery of a highway measure on the A23 at the A23-A2300 junction, for which there is no certainty of delivery. Without that, the implications of the DPD across the whole of Burgess Hill should be considered unacceptable. In terms of the more localised impact as affected by particularly sites SA12 and SA13, I'd refer you, sir, to the modelling reports by Sistra, which are supporting documentation for the DPD. And they draw particular attention to the impacts of the DPD itself and the DPD with mitigation at junctions S6, which is the junction of Kima Road with Station Road, just to the east of the station, and junction S27, which is the junction of Folders Lane and Kima Road. Now, particularly relevant here is that even with the delivered mitigation as part of the DPD, at junction S6, the junction remains severely overloaded. And at junction S27, closer to SA12 and 13, junction of Folders Lane and Kima Road, the impact actually increases compared to the without mitigation scenario, and it increases to a level which the district council has determined would be significant, if not severe. The point here is to take up on what Dr. Bowles was putting to you. It's perverse to conclude that in the reference case, which does not include any of the DPD allocations, the impact on a junction is severe, and then to conclude that an incremental additional impact as a result of the DPD allocations does not in itself constitute a severe impact. It's the cumulative impact which is important, and in all cases at junction S6, the consequence of the reference case as well as the DPD are severe impacts, severe cumulative impacts. They're unresolved. There's no measures put forward in the local plan to resolve those issues. There's a reliance on unspecified sustainable transport improvements, but the level of modal change which would have to be achieved has not been demonstrated to be achievable, and the level that was assumed reasonably in the SISTRA modelling is far short of what would be needed to reduce the impact of the resultant traffic flows at those junctions to a level which was less than overcapacity. And I think it's worth pointing out as well that as much as is possible is already included as an improvement to the operation of that junction in the reference case, which includes signalisation of what is currently a small roundabout. So the reference case already assumes the maximum amount of highways mitigation that could be implemented there. The situation gets worse with the DPD, even with the mitigation strategy of the DPD.
Thank you, Mr. New. And just for completeness, the inspector has received with the site promoters for SA13's hearing statement a memo from Stephen G at the Highways Authority. Have you seen that document?
Yes, I have. Yes.
So just so the inspector's got your view on that, because you obviously won't have seen that when you put your hearing statement in. You'll see what he says in that document about those junctions you've just drawn to the inspector's attention on the penultimate page: Keema Road, Folders Lane, Junction Road, Silverdale Road, Keema Road, Station Road Junction.
Mr. G's response.
Yes. Do you want to just give your view on that memo so the inspector's got your thoughts on the approach of the Highways Authority here?
As I understand it, the assessment that was put to Mr. G as part of the pre-application consultation was not based on use of the strategic modelling output from the SISTRA work, but was based instead on a separate assessment, a rather more conventional assessment in instances where there isn't a transport model, of measuring observed flows, growth in them up using Tempro as a background tool, adding in for any particular significant local commitments, and then adding your own development on top. Now, I've looked at what Tempro includes. Interestingly, over the period from 2014 to 2031, when the local plan itself is proposing 16,390 in total, Tempro includes only 13,305. That's additional households over that period. The reason being that Tempro is based on a trip end modelling process that takes in land use information, number of households, number of jobs supplied by local planning authorities periodically over the life of the Tempo programme. The latest information that was included predates the local plan, was based on 2015 information. It therefore underestimates, as background growth, the amount of traffic which would automatically be taken into account if the local plan itself had been taken into account. So there's a significant underestimate in the background growth which is assumed in the transport model in which Mr. Stephen G was commenting on.
Thank you. I mean, obviously we've got the Highways Authority here and the inspector will hear from them in their own terms today, but just in your view, how helpful then is this memo to the exercise this inspector's conducting today?
I don't think it is particularly helpful. It's, as far as I can see, it is inappropriately based, and the conclusions drawn from it are incapable of taking account of the strategic reroutings which were consequent of the mitigation measures put forward as part of the DPD. The approach to modelling of this site should, in my view, have taken account of the model and utilised the model because it was available, and it's the only tool that's available and capable of handling the very significant changes in traffic patterns which would arise as a result of the improvements at A23, A2300 in the area, which is the underpinning principle of the mitigation strategy.
Thank you very much, Mr. New. Was there anything else you wanted to say initially to the inspector by way of summary?
I don't think so, other than stressing once again that it is the cumulative impact which is important, and it's simply not good enough to say that material changes between scenarios does not constitute severe impact when the cumulative impact quite clearly is.
Thank you, Mr. New. That's very helpful. You can turn your camera off and mute yourself just for now, but stay on the call. Thank you.
I will.
Thank you. So I mentioned there was a second short point relating to infrastructure on SA13, which is probably best accommodated under your little Roman 5. And I mentioned I'd ask Mr. Grace to address you on that. And here he is.
Thank you, sir. Short point really, but we have expressed some grave concerns relating to the inadequacies of the IDP. Whilst the IDP provides a list of necessary infrastructure provision in association with each of the individual allocations, it fails to set out a holistic picture for infrastructure across the district, and it doesn't take into account the cumulative impacts of proposed allocations within each settlement. And we've talked about the Northern Arc and the level of development that is happening at Burgess Hill, given the significant levels of growth already being experienced and in the pipeline and over the past 10 years, it's felt this hasn't been matched by infrastructure delivery. And therefore, key services arguably being stretched beyond their means. And given the what we have argued and will continue to argue to be an over provision of housing at Burgess Hill, then there is a need for these cumulative impacts to be carefully considered. There appears to be a lack of detail with regards to how monies will be utilised. We've set out in our hearing statement, but it's something that, as I say, I'm sure we'll hear more on from those promoting the site. But with regards to education, the only primary school within walking distance of sites 12 and 13, Birchwood Grove, the latest figures that we have, that's of March 2020, just having capacity of some 5 additional pupils, I think we can understand that development of 340 new homes simply is not going to be five additional pupils is not going to be enough. And so it's not clear where and how this is going to be dealt with. And the concern is of the local community that there is a new primary school part of the strategic development at Clayton Mills to the north of Hassocks. And it is conceivable, sir, that actually it would be a location where children would have to travel to. I'm sure you've done your site visits, but if you go again, do look for a footpath or some means of travelling south to Hassocks, and I think that you will find that it is most difficult to do so unless you're in a car. So there are comments, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. Moving on, sir, then, with your permission, to Little Roman 6, impact on living conditions. Just a short point that arises here. I'm going to ask I should say Ms. Stewart has her hand up, so she's trying to attract your attention, so I'll just pause a minute.
Thank you very much, and my sincere apologies for interjecting at this moment. I'm conscious of time, and as you'll know, Inspector, unfortunately, this national park needs to disappear at 11 from this session. We had a further point we wanted to make on Roman numeral 7, and I just wondered whether it would be possible to be able to make that point, but before 11 o'clock. So I just was trying to find a good moment to interject and raise this point.
Yeah, it's 20 to 11, so you haven't got an awful lot of time, but do carry on, Stuart.
Thank you very much. If it's okay, I'd like to pass you to my colleague, Ruth Childs, to cover this point. Ruth,
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. My name's Ruth Childs. I'm the landscape specialist here at the South Downs National Park. It was just a further point we wanted to make on SA 13 before we have to dash off. And I wanted to draw your attention in particular to page 16 of the LVIA, which has been submitted in support of that site allocation, and it helpfully highlights some of the past landscape capacity sensitivity studies that have been undertaken for that site. And one of them is, I think the most recent one in 2015 was conducted by LUC, and they've identified the site has two different capacities. So the northern part of the site, the first 3 fields that you come to south of Burgess Hill, have been given a medium capacity for development, and they've actually quantified what this might be. So 21 to 50 dwellings, according to LUC, in terms of the landscape capacity there. The southern part of the site, they've given a low to medium capacity, so a much more reduced ability for that landscape to receive development. And so we're really keen, as we said earlier, to work with Mid Sussex on getting a landscape master plan or concept study that better reflects their evidence base.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
In the area to the south, the area with the lower to medium capacity,
yep,
are you advocating or advising me as a national park that there should be no development in that southern area?
We're advising that we'd really like the layout to respond to that evidence. We support that evidence. It's very similar to our own research that we undertook prior to the Reg 18 consultation. We came up with a very similar outcome, if you like, of our own study. So I guess in an ideal world, yes, but we appreciate there's a real need for housing as well. And I wonder whether those sites could be used to create a more meaningful transition between the developed area of Burgess Hill and the rural countryside, as Catherine set out in her opening statement.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Is that all you need to say? Or
that is for now. Thank you.
Commendably brief. Thank you very much.
So can I just chip in there, because it goes back to the question you raised with us, whether it's possible to have a meaningful conversation with the park about what sort of density they think is possible. And I say with the greatest respect, Ms. Childs, in her answer to your last question, if that is the kind of answer we're going to get, then we are not going to be able to have a meaningful discussion which produces a useful note to you. Your question to her was, are you saying no development in that area? And the answer came back, ideally, yes, but we recognise there might need to be something. In terms of helping you with what South Downs National Park's position is on what the site is capable of bearing, which is the question that you asked them and you've asked us to go away and cooperate with them, we're going to need a lot more than that. So I understand Ms. Childs may not be able to answer the question now, but in order to come back to you with a meaningful note, we are going to have to be able to drill down a little bit beyond. We recognise there's going to need to be something. I mean, the LUC paper doesn't talk about this as being an area of no development. The way in which it's put is low to medium capacity. We need to answer your question to be able to put numbers on that.
Does the National Park just wish to come back on that briefly before I go back to Dr. Bowes?
Yes, please, sir. Lucy Howard, Planning Policy Manager at the National Park. I'd like to stress that we're not objecting to the development of the site. We're not anti-development. We understand that people need homes. We would very much like to engage with Miss Sussex District Council on the issue, and we are sure that a certain amount of development can be accommodated. But the District Council needs to look at its own evidence base. Its own evidence base from LUC is saying a significantly reduced capacity to what the proposed allocation is for. Thank you, sir. So just to reiterate, we'll be happy to talk to Mid Sussex at the interval.
Can I just ask you, Lucy Howard, a question about, if you like, reduction of impact in this area? Are you stressing that it's the numbers and the density of the housing, or are there other solutions that should be explored? For example, would a more effective, if you like, thicker landscape barrier, which over a few years would mature into an extensive tree screen or hedgerow, would that be one, or bunding or something like that? Yeah, would that be able to hide a multitude of sins, if that's the right expression to use?
Thank you.
Probably not the correct term to use, but you know what I mean.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I would say, as a last resort, you turn to hiding things in screening and buffers. The approach of the National Park Authority, what we are saying, that we've said in our reps, is that you need to put landscape first. You need to look at the landscape first, analyse the landscape, and from that analysis, you come up with a figure. What we don't want, which is it seems to have happened to date, is you come up with a figure and you then look to mitigate. So you look at the landscape first, and it is, of course, a nationally protected landscape.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, and good luck at the coffee break.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Bowes, I'll come back to you. Andrew Black, I noticed you got your hand up as well. Please be patient. I just want to go through basically Dr. Ashley Bowes' case, more or less intact, and then we'll see other people's views after that. So, Dr. Bowes, over to you again.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'd got to your Little Roman 6, significant impact on living conditions, and Mr. Grace just wanted to draw to your attention some of the acknowledged impacts in the evidence base for SA 13.
Thank you again, sir. We say that there will be a significant impact during the stages of construction by way of noise and disturbance, but of course there's also the longer term impact, which will be a permanent loss and appreciation of a valued landscape to the local community that, as we've heard, forms the setting of the national park. And you would probably say, well, we would say that, wouldn't we? We would look or ask you to look at the landscape work that has been submitted in support of SA 13, and I direct you to paragraphs 5.10 down to 5.12. And what that basically says, it says that it identifies that the visual effect on properties, I mean, I can paraphrase, but the Winton's Close, Folders Gardens, Guild Place, etc. Basically, all those houses that form the northern and western boundary of the site. It states that the impact will be a substantial adverse impact at year one, reducing to moderate. Reducing to moderate, of course, when it states in paragraph 5.11, when planting matures. There will be a debate about, I'm sure, how quickly trees grow and don't grow, and the specimens that you can put into landscaping schemes these days. But what we would say there is an acknowledgement that there will be a substantial adverse impact upon the local community if, in particular, SA 13 were to be allocated. Thank you, sir.
So, and just for your note, that was document SA 13.1, from which Mr. Grace was quoting the landscape visual appraisal for SA 13 under the heading Visual Impact and Effects.
It's very helpful.
Thank you.
I just wanted to just get a grip on, at year one, you're saying there's a substantial adverse impact.
Well, it's actually their evidence, sir. Yeah, it's a 510 to 511. The promoter is saying that on the properties they list, there will be a substantial adverse effect at year one, so on completion. Yeah.
And is there a figure that comes down to, or does it maintain that substantial adverse impact?
No, it then goes on to say reducing to moderate adverse as the mitigation planting establishes, and that's what the point Mr. Grace was putting to you about.
Thank you.
That could be a movable feast. It could be as much as 10 years for mitigation planting to establish.
Thank you. Do carry on.
Thank you. And then that leads us neatly on to landscape, which is your Little Roman 7, significant impact on the quality of the landscape, e.g. integrity of green gaps, etc. Just to set this in context, we've alluded to DP18, which you have in the district plan, which particularly protects the setting, or should I say, particularly protects land which makes a contribution to the setting of the South Downs National Park. So that was seen as a policy objective that could be met as part of the delivery of the strategy. And you have para 170 of the framework, which enjoins decision makers in plan making and decision taking to protect valued landscapes and those of a statutory designation, such as national parks, and of course to recognise the intrinsic quality, character and beauty of all countryside at 170B. Just to highlight, you'll be very familiar with the essay references at page 124 in the essay, where the Folders Lane sites were all scored together. There was a negative assessment on landscape, and that was said to be because of the low/medium capacity of the landscape to absorb the proposed development. So that's page 124 of the essay, and options C, F and G form the SA 12 and SA 13 site allocations. You can see those assessed there. So that's the council's assessment. One point I probably don't need to make to you now you've heard direct from the National Park, but as it wasn't quite correct for the council to tell you in the matter 3.3 hearing statement that the South Downs National Park Authority do not object to the principle of SA 13. I think they've told you quite plainly that they've got concerns about its proposed scale. and you have, for completeness, the statement of common ground at DC 11, where the South Downs National Park Authority make that point, and of course they've made it to you directly. So with those short evidential and policy matters, I'm just going to turn then to Mr. Grace to summarise his assessment of the landscape impacts for you.
Okay.
Thank you again, sir. First of all, just with relation to the council's hearing statement, MSDC-02 and their, let's say, commentary. Just one thing that I felt was clearly omitting from that is that the council's hearing statement omits reference to the public footpath adjacent to SA12. I'm sure that you will have walked that public footpath. It was the very, very first thing that I did when I was instructed. It is essential, and I think you said at the very start, sir, that you'd be asking and wanting people to confirm maybe specific locations where you would want to you want to feel that you have viewed sites from. This public footpath adjacent to SA12 is clearly critical. The LVI submitted by Jones Homes, prepared by Lizard Landscape Design and Ecology, outlines in its executive summary that it identifies an overall moderate sensitivity to the site with a resulting medium capacity to change. And its landscape sensitivity is moderate, and a medium magnitude of change is anticipated with built form and road layouts compared to their previous agricultural / current use. It's argued that the impact on the footpath will be low. As I say, my assessment would be, and I'm not a qualified landscape consultant, and I acknowledge that before anybody would say otherwise, that the impact will be low. My assessment is will be much higher, as I believe that footpath actually forms a defensible boundary to the east of the existing Jones site. It's argued that the eastern edge of SA12 would define the settlement. It's my view, sir, that the western boundary and footpath already define the settlement. We cannot agree that SA12 is more associated with the suburban edge of Burgess Hill than as part of a buffer to the national park. And the appeal decision, and that's the appeal decision, what I say commonly is the Jones appeal decision, specifically set out that only limited weight was given to the setting of the South Downs National Park policy because it was an emerging plan at that time. At this point, of course, we have an adopted district plan, and it states, page 65, DP18, setting of the South Downs National Park. So not an emerging policy as it was within the appeal, but now a very much an adopted policy. I have to quote, because it is critical to our case, that development within land that contributes to the setting of the South Downs National Park will only be permitted where it does not detract from or cause detriment to the visual and special qualities, including dark skies, tranquility, and essential characteristics of the national park, and should not adversely affect transitional open green spaces between the site and the boundary of the national park, and the views, outlook, and aspect into and out of the national park by virtue of its location, scale, form of design. I have to say, and we all do it, but this particular policy, 18, sir, from my reading of the LVIA, there is a policy section within pages 7 and 8 of the Lizard report, SA12, and we would ask why it appears that this particular policy has been omitted. There is no reference. There's reference to a number of other policies, and if I have missed it, then I will accept that I've simply missed it. But in my reading, that particular piece of work appears to have omitted any reference to DP18, which is unfortunate. Paragraph 5.16 states that the site in general is not considered to comprise of a valued landscape in relation to paragraph 170. We disagree with that, and we consider that the characteristics are more akin to the South Downs National Park than the suburban edge of Burgess Hill. And this is particularly so as you walk south along the footpath from its entrance point on Folders Lane. So with more specifically, say with SA12 at this point, in summary, the impact on the landscape, we feel, will not be low. It's acknowledged in the LVIA that it will be, by their assessment, moderate, and the impact from the public footpath, in our view, will be a high and significant impact. And the LVIA highlights that the site will be of similar characteristics to the land to the south. So there is an acknowledgement there that the characteristic is with the land to the south, not with the land to the north. And the buffer to the South Downs National Park would be critically compromised. And I must also draw attention to comments that have been made by the South Downs National Park and East Sussex County Council in relation to the recently withdrawn application on the site. And I quote from the South Downs National Park in their letter to Mid Sussex District Council dated on the 5th of August 2019, and this is in relation to the withdrawn application DM/190276. It would extend well beyond the existing residential boundary of Folders Lane in Burgess Hill. The further expansion of residential development in this locality on open rural land outside the settlement boundary, together with its infrastructure, would significantly reduce the landscape buffer up to the boundary of the national park. In turn, such development is likely to detrimentally exacerbate the further urbanisation of this predominantly rural location, which is likely to be harmful to the special qualities and landscape character and setting of the national park. There's more to read. I'm not going to reread it because of time, but I would ask you to continue to read that letter, sir, because it is an important one. And say rather than read that one, I refer. Sorry, sir.
What day in August was that letter again?
I apologise. The 5th of August.
No, you didn't say. I just didn't write it down.
Sorry, 5th of August 2019. That's the South Downs National Park response to application DM/190276.
Thank you.
And with regards to the same application, East Sussex County Council's comments dated the 12th of April states under section a landscape context, a study of the historic maps back to the 1870s indicates that the structure of the landscape on site has changed little since this time. The application site is therefore of local landscape value as unspoiled pasture in non-intensive agricultural use. The field subject to this application is of similar characteristics to the fields within the South Downs National Park immediately to the south. So there is a very clear link that there is this connection. And where the buffer areas to be designated landscapes of similar landscapes value, character and value, they need to be afforded a similar degree of protection. And of course, we have this running through all the way through, all the way from the district plan, all the way from within the neighbourhood plan, all the way through comments from the national park and from other consultees, excluding, of course, the numerous comments that have been made by local residents, that this is a special area that must be or should be protected. With regards to what is effectively an associated issue in terms of ecology, the reports that have been submitted in relation to SA12 also identify the site being a rich site and one accommodating reptiles and bats, great crested newts and birds. And we conclude, as the ecology is a phase 1 report, that the site is not an ecologically poor site, but has the potential to accommodate, and this is with regards to SA12, a full range of protected species. We then, if I can keep going, sir, some further landscape comments with regards to SA13. I'm quite happy to repeat that, as I say, I'm not a qualified landscape consultant, but my views do differ to those of CSA in their LVIA and accord more with the views of the South Downs National Park, as Mr. Bowles has already commented in their statement of common ground with the council, which clearly sets out that they do not consider a major development of 300 houses in this location could or should be supported. And there is no agreement that 300 dwellings can be accommodated in a way which is sensitive to the role of this area as part of the rural transition from Burgess Hill to the South Downs National Park, which includes many characteristics, as I say, of elements of the Wealden landscape. I'd highlight the following in the LVIA. This LVIA does reference, I have to say, DP18, unlike the previous one I've mentioned, and it needs, therefore, and identifies the need to protect the setting of the national park. In paragraph 3.9, it outlines that the area to be can be described as a gently undulating landscape with views dominated by the steep downward scarp to the south and high weald fringes to the north. And I just pose there and say again, on my initial site visits, I had the benefit of looking south over through SA13 from properties on the northern edge. And I would again, in terms of view, sir, there we much talked about, I believe, in terms of the fact that this is a hidden and only glimpse views of the site. I would ask you that you do look, we can provide you with an address and a willing participant to look at SA13 from that northern boundary and from, as I say, not one property, but a whole, a large number of properties. And we would ask you to look at SA13 from these points. Appreciate that they're not public viewpoints, but there are a large number of points, of viewpoints in terms of from the local community. Paragraph 3.10 identifies the hedgerows contribute significantly and strongly to the essence of the landscape. And paragraph 3.18 outlines the site has a medium landscape character with capacity for only limited development. Now, again, these are not our words, these are the views of the consultant, having regard to the setting and form of the existing settlement. we will still say there is no, as we've spent talking about the first 2 days, there is no actual need to allocate SA12 or SA13 at all. But the council, the promoters consultants, as I say, themselves say that there is only the capacity for limited development. 3.21 outlines there's only limited small scale development provided. There is regard for existing features and sensitivities within the landscape. 4.23, they say the site does not form an important component of the setting of the South Downs National Park. We clearly fundamentally disagree with this, as I think you've heard from the South Downs National Park. I think that it is an important component for the setting of the national park. In terms of paragraph 4.33, the LVI outlines that it is not a valued landscape for the purposes of paragraph 170 of the MPPF. We consider that it is a valued landscape which forms a critical planning function, protecting the setting of the national park. And paragraph 4.35 also acknowledges that the landscape structure does date back to 1874 and remains largely unchanged. Another feature being the mature oaks and hornbeam trees which exist along the boundaries of the site. And it is agreed that these, of course, must be maintained and retained. 4.36, and we are getting there, sir. 4.36, the South Downs National Park is a nationally important landscape. And 4.38, there is generally a buffer between Burgess Hill and the South Downs National Park. I'll just pause on that. There is a buffer. It's allocation of these sites. We're talking about housing number buffers, but in this sense, and you've heard it from the South Downs National Park, it should be, and it was never really identified in the SA, landscape first in this location, landscape first. It's a nationally important landscape and there is generally a buffer between Burgess Hill and the South Downs National Park. Allocation of these sites would significantly remove that buffer. 5.10 identifies the visual effect, and this is the point that has arguably been made, on the properties will be substantial and adverse. That's 5.10, as I said, all the way through to 5.12. I won't repeat that. 5.28 acknowledges that development would result in the loss of a series of pastoral fields. And 5.31 envisaged that the indirect effect on the local landscape character will be moderate adverse within the immediate vicinity. The cumulative impact of SA12 would be a loss of agricultural land, something that is not encouraged. 6.3, the site is assessed as being overall medium landscape quality and value and pleasant in character. It's most definitely pleasant in character. So we would elevate its quality to more than that. And 6.6 of the promoters LVI states that new houses will be visible from many adjoining residential properties. So again, that gives some credence to what I'm saying here, that they say that it will be visible from many adjoining residential properties. 6.7, fundamental disagreement, however, I think that we can summarise on that a development of 300 houses can come forward without resulting in significant harm to the national park. The existing buffer in its setting is long established. It's an open and natural landscape, and it can be argued that retention of hedgerows, which would, the retention of hedgerows in themselves, sir, would arguably be no more than a pastiche boundary in relation to new homes, domestic paraphernalia, and it simply does not lead us to conclude that the landscape would only have a moderate to low impact in the short to medium term. And I take breath there and stop. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Grace, could I just ask you for your view, given what you've said, on compliance or otherwise with policy DP18 of the district plan, requirement to not adversely affect the transitional open green spaces between the site and the boundary of the South Downs National Park? Well, what's your view about whether these allocations would comply with that or they conflict with it?
Clearly, my view is that there would be a clear conflict with policy DP18. This is recently adopted policy within the district plan, and as I say, in the case of SA12 and the landscape assessment.
Right, you are breaking up actually. It's difficult to hear what is being said there.
Sorry, in summary, clear conflict with DP18.
Right, okay. Mr. Bowes, Dr. Bowes, how much time do you want on this?
So I would have anticipated about 5 minutes remaining on landscape and then a very short point at ecology, which completes your little Roman 7. And then we just have, I would say, no more than 10 minutes on your little Romans 8 and 9, which is the heritage and the accessibility. So as you probably gather from our hearing statement, landscape was one of our primary points. So that took the lion's share.
We'll go on until 11:30, then we will have a break, and then
you,
afterwards we'll bring other people in. So, okay, carry on.
Thank you very much. And then, Mr. Grace, given your assessment that this was a valued landscape, what's your view about compliance with Para 170 of the framework and the requirement to protect and enhance such landscapes?
Thank you. Yes, paragraphs 170 to 172 of the MPPF. We believe that there is a lack of recognition of the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. And it's quite simple. Paragraph 172 clearly states that great weight should be given to conserving and enhancing landscape and the scenic beauty in national parks. This site is not within the national park, but it is the last essentially open gaps between the town and the national park boundary. Allocating SA12 would be contradictory to this aim. The landscape has acknowledged landscape policy and does form that critical scope interface.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. So those are our comments on landscape. There was just a short point to draw to your attention on ecology. You will have seen there's an ecology appraisal from both the promoters of SA12 and 13, and those are dated August and July 2020. However, after those went in, there is a Regulation 19 consultation response from the Sussex Wildlife Trust. And so you have that at ID 748. And you'll see from that that they are remaining unsatisfied as to the acceptability of development of those sites. So you will have read it, I'm sure, and you'll reflect on it in due course, I know, but I just wanted to, my clients were keen for you to have drawn to your attention ID 748, which is Sussex Wildlife Trust's Regulation 19 consultation response, and that postdates the evidence you have from the promoters. So next, and briefly on heritage, you have helpfully a heritage statement from the promoters of SA13, which is SA 13.3, and you will have detected within that paragraph 4.6 that there is identified by the heritage consultants harm of a less than substantial nature to the significance of the grade 2 listed high chimneys. And that's at paragraph 4.6, sites development within 2-storey buildings would be likely to cause less than substantial harm to the significance of high chimneys. And that arises because they explain at paragraph 4.5 that there was a historic association between the land of SA13 and that grade 2 listed building, and that's revealed in a tide map. And that's where that issue arises. That's acknowledged in the site-specific appraisal in the SA, but we say, unfortunately, that's not been carried through to the appraisal of the overall strategy at page 59, because if you go to page 59 in the SA, it simply says for heritage there are no negative impacts expected from any of the three options. And so that's just factually not correct, because the evidence from the promoter for SA13 acknowledges there would be less than substantial harm. And you'll know, it's probably been told to you so many times, but paragraph 193 of the framework says you've got to give great weight, even if it's any harm has got to carry great weight, and that is implementing the statutory requirement of section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. So notwithstanding it's said to be less than substantial, that doesn't necessarily translate to a less than substantial objection to the allocation of the scheme. And I just wanted to draw that to your attention. And we say that there's one final consequence of that, and that's DP 34 of the district plan. DP 34 of the existing district plan says, in respect of the historic environment, that with regard to listed buildings, development will be required to protect listed buildings and their settings. And we say, well, straightforwardly, therefore, there'll be a conflict with that particular requirement. And perhaps had that been acknowledged in the essay assessment on page 59, when they were comparing those three strategies that we talked about all the way back on day one between options A, B, and C, well, that may well have influenced how that was assessed. And then finally, access to services and facilities. There was just an issue we wanted to draw out here, because in the hearing statement that the council has provided for you in its pro formas sections, when it goes through all of the sections, for SA12, it says this performs well for regeneration, but I just want to draw to your attention page 124 of the sustainability appraisal, because at 124 in the sustainability appraisal, it says the complete opposite. If you turn to regeneration, it says options G and H, option G is SA12. It says options G and H are remote from the existing town centre, so have a negative impact on this objective. So that's just plainly inconsistent with what the essay says. I just wanted to draw that out, lest that be overlooked. And if I may just say so, in the sort of remaining 10 minutes or so available to me, shortly, you posed a question to the Member of Parliament about, well, if these sites were to be deleted, if you were to come to that conclusion, well, where do you make up that shortfall in terms of the buffer? Because it would make it up. Well, we would say, well, first of all, you heard our evidence on it would still deliver an adequate buffer, even if you deleted them and didn't replace them. Secondly, if you weren't with us on that and you thought, well, no, actually, there should be a buffer in the region of 400 or so, or plus, or more than that, we say, well, the proper approach then would be to record in an interim letter that you were of the view these sites were unsound, and invite the council to conduct consultation on alternatives. You've heard plenty of submissions yesterday on alternative emission sites that other promoters are saying haven't been properly included. And that would give the option to do that. But of course, alternatively, you were told, and this was yesterday's news, that the council are already in the process of doing a review, that these sites are not required to deliver a robust housing land supply between now and when that review is completed, because the site allocations DPD in its 20 constant sites would deliver the full need for the entire period. Even if you assumed it took twice as long to do the review, it would have a robust and deliverable housing land supply for that period, which would then allow the council to review the strategy and the sites together in the review. So that would be an alternative option open to the council. But of course, the proper way forward, in my respectful submission, would be if you were to be with us, that these sites, after proper consideration, were not sound, would be for you, sir, to write to the council in the normal way in an interim letter, record that fact, and then simply invite them to come back with what their proposed solution was. And we say, well, there too, either they could go and consult if they really wanted to carry on with this in this document, or they could take the option of the early review that they've undertaken for the district plan. So those are our a summary of our case as to why we say SA 12 and 13 are unsound, and we would invite you to record that they are when you've had an opportunity to reflect on all the evidence. Thank you for allowing us to speak.
Right. Has Andrew Black got a really urgent point at this, or can it wait until afterwards?
I'm happy to wait. So, I mean, I only need 5 minutes, probably less, if you want me to make it now, or happy if everyone's keen to wait.
Yeah, just have a quick 5 minutes, Mr. Black.
Thank you, sir. So, yeah, I mean, certainly what Dr. Bowes and Mr. Grace took you through there was a very forensic review of those points and echoed many of the points that I was going to take you to. So it really just leaves 2 points for me to make on this. Firstly, on landscape, your Roman numeral 7, on your question that you've asked, just looking there at the council matters statement, the council in their matters statement say to you that the site is undeveloped, greenfield, and therefore has landscape and ecological sensitivity. It's located 350 to 400 metres from the boundary of the national park, which is all agreed. The second sentence there then says, however, in the context of Burgess Hill being a Category 1 settlement, and mindful of the existing development activity at the adjacent parcel of land, it is considered that the site offers a sustainable location for growth. Now, it's that second sentence there that I feel is, well, pointing towards whether the council have been swayed in the position of this site and considerations in that regard. In my mind, sir, the location of this in terms of whether it's a Category 1 settlement or any category is a separate matter, and that's to be considered under separate points that you've raised. It certainly isn't what the wording of paragraph 172 or even the thrust of it says. It doesn't say that impacts on landscape or ecology should be dialed down or given any less weight in an area that's more sustainable. It just simply doesn't say that. And I don't understand then, are the council saying that impact on the national park in Category 1 settlements should be given less weight than if it was an impact lower down in the settlement hierarchy? I'm sure that's not what they're saying, but it appears that has effectively skewed their thinking on this. Mr. Grace took you to the comments from South Downs National Park that were made to the previous application. It was something I was going to take you to. And again, I would certainly commend you have a full read of that letter, because those comments made, whilst it's in response to a planning application, they are of a nature that set out some substantial concerns around the very principle of development on this site that I don't think can be remedied through what is being said to you. And more than that, sir, my view is that the council have had a dry run on this. Those comments were made in effectively nearly 2 years ago, in August 2019. And you're now in a position, so of examining a plan that's been put in front of you, and this work, frankly, hasn't been undertaken. And the council, from what I've heard today, seems to undertake that work. And therefore, it strikes me that the council have known about this for 2 years. They've known about these concerns, and yet they've continued to advance a plan with allocations where substantial concerns are known, and have not sought to work with South Downs National Park to overcome them. And really, from my perspective, this is setting up a conflict when it comes to applications on this site that will come in. And that surely cannot be an effective plan that sets up such conflicts, and that should have been resolved. So I'll just put a marker on that. The only other point so that I was going to raise was in relation to your Roman numeral 9, which is access to shops and facilities. And again, commending what Dr. Bowes and Mr. Grace took you to, there was just one further point in terms of access to facilities and particularly schools. Now, Section 6 of the transport statement for this site that's been submitted as SA12, this is site SA12, the transport statement that's submitted as part of the evidence base, that sets out in Section 6 that the nearest primary school is 1.3 kilometres or a 16-minute walk. It's 18 minutes walk to Burgess Hill Girls' School, but the nearest mixed secondary school is 2.3 kilometres or a 29-minute walk. And Burgess Hill Town Centre is set out as a 2 kilometre or 25-minute walk. Now, if you look in the table that's in section 6, table 6.1, that sets out preferred maximum distances for those, and those several of those distances are outside of those maximum distances. And it really is just, again, a point on site selection that we say, sir, that the council here is effectively looking at selecting the least sustainable sites in the most sustainable settlements, if I can put it like that. And there's a risk that these site allocations are bringing forward sites that are aligned with Burgess Hill and other category 1 settlements. But when you look at them, when you take a step back, you look at where they are in those settlements and they are in unsustainable locations. And that really is just a point of site selection and looking right back to what you have, sir, in terms of the objectives of this plan and how these site allocations align with that. That's all I wanted to say, sir. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. We will now take a break and we will come back at 12 o'clock. Thank you. Oh, she is.
What time are we back, Mike?
Midday, so 5 minutes to go.
Okay.
I'm going to bring on Heather Sargent QC next, so they can put forward their points on behalf of the developers. And then Mr. Brown will get his turn again. I'm sure he'll have a lot to say in response to what he's heard.
Lot to get through.
Yeah, there is quite, even though it's only 2 sites, a lot to get through. I've got a sore wrist already after 3 days.
Mine's tapping. Tap, tap, tap.
I bet you get a sore wrist as well. You get repetitive strain and all that.
From tapping, yes. Typing, tapping, typing.
Yeah.
Actually, could I just clarify something? I had. Right, it's okay. I'll talk to you about it later. It's just regarding the clarifying the action as it was understood yesterday.
Right, we'll chat about that over lunch break if you like. My dog's been amazingly well behaved today, I have to say.
So is Fred.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think the postie's been, and she's not barked at them, so that's an advancement on some time. Right, it's midday. Guess we should be going.
Everybody's here.
Right, let's try on. Right, the hearings are now in session again. I would like to invite Heather Sargent QC and her team to make any presentation they wish to make. It will be helpful if it was along similar lines to the previous group from Dr. Bowes, making points in relation to the criteria, little Roman numerals 1 through to 11. So can I welcome Heather Sargent QC to the proceedings?
So good afternoon, and thank you for that. I must emphasise I'm not a QC, maybe one day, but certainly not.
I
don't know how that's made its way to you. But you've been misinformed.
On my piece of paper.
And so yes, I will. I'll go through the Roman numerals that you've raised in your 3.3, and probably in turn. I think that's most straightforward. And I'm going to focus evidently on responding to the points made by the participants this morning, and not obviously repeating what we've already said in writing to you. So on the first, on Roman numeral 1, willingness to implement, I don't think there's anything that I need to add to what we've conveyed in our written submissions. And then I can deal very quickly with Roman number 2, in response to Dr. Bose's query this morning. Yes, the land is within the control of the site promoters for the pedestrian access through to Folders Lane to the north. So I hope that that answers his query in that regard. And then turning to number 3 and the conflict with any made neighbourhood plan. So the only point that I wish to emphasise on behalf of the site promoters is really to express my agreement with Mr. Brown QC's submission this morning. I mean, there simply cannot be a conflict with a neighbourhood plan when the sites in question lie outside of the plan area. That's not possible as I read the statute. And I don't agree that it's a technical point, as Dr. Bose suggested. Legally, I just do not see how there can be a conflict if the site in question is outside of the neighbourhood plan area. So that's the end of that, really, as far as we're concerned. But for completeness, we have explained, sir, how even if somehow theoretically there could be a conflict with the provisions of the neighbourhood plan, then as to policy H3, which is concerned with areas of townscape value, whilst that does include both Folders Lane and Kemah Road, due to a combination of the established development on those routes and to the natural screening and the topography of SA13, the housing on that allocation wouldn't be apparent from within that area of designation.
Thank you.
So then coalescence, I think, came up at this point. So I'll deal with it just because that's, I think, the order that it was taken in. As you all have seen and be well aware, so the SA13 sites located to the rear of existing residential development along both Kemah Road and, importantly, Wellhouse Lane. And that existing residential development is closer to the villages to the south than any of the dwellings proposed as part of the allocation would be. We also are of the view that the gap between the allocation and Clayton Mills, the development to the north of Hassocks, I think, would remain at around 750 metres, which we consider is sufficient to maintain a significant physical and visual gap, and certainly to avoid physical coalescence.
Thank you.
And so I do just want to briefly consider what policy DP13 of the district plan actually requires. So first, it said that it's important that the separate identity of towns and villages is maintained. We say there's no problem presented by the allocation in that respect. And then it stipulates that when travelling between settlements, people should have a sense that they've left one, excuse me, before they arrive at the next. Again, we say that they will. And then finally, development will be permitted if it doesn't result in the coalescence of settlements that harms the separate identity and amenity of settlements and wouldn't have an unacceptably urbanising effect on the area between settlements. So for the reasons that I outlined a moment ago, we say that realistically, sir, there is no conflict with this policy.
Thank you.
And then highways. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Muirhead from Odyssey very swiftly. But in summary, we agree with the council's approach to what is a severe impact, which, as I read the council's hearing statements, is an approach that the Highways Authority and indeed Highways England are also content with. And as you all have seen when going through the documents, we rely in particular on Appendix 1 to our hearing statement actually for matter 6, but that's where you'll find the Odyssey Highways Appraisal Assessment.
Was that Appendix 6?
It's Appendix 1 to our matter 6 hearing statement, I think is how it's made its way into the evidence. And that document, in summary, sir, evidences that there wouldn't be any severe impacts from the allocation, and you'll have seen from the pre-application consultation response that was discussed this morning that the Highways Authority, so West Sussex County Council, agree with that conclusion. So if I may, so I'm going to hand over to Mr. Muirhead now and give him an opportunity to respond to Mr. New's points that were raised this morning.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. I hope you can see me. Ben Muirhead from Odyssey.
I can, yeah.
Hope you can hear me okay. Ben Muirhead from Odyssey, representing Faken and Persimmon Homes. Just want to run through a few points with respect to highways matters. In the first instance, with respect to severity, there's obviously been comment with respect to paragraph 109 of the framework with respect to cumulative cumulative impact, and I just wanted to set out my view in that regard. Firstly, in terms of the cumulative impacts and the way that the SISTRA model has analysed those. So in terms of background traffic and background committed infrastructure, so highways improvements, my view with respect to the cumulative impacts is we are testing development allocations, and different development allocation scenarios is what the SISTRA modelling analysis set out. So I agree with the SISTRA modelling and with the council with respect to how they set out severity in that regard, in terms of an element with respect to how congested an existing junction is operating, but also with respect to the development impact and the development's impacts on specific junctions. So I would use an example. If you're in a congested area, it is not considered severe for a development that puts 1 or 2 vehicles through a junction an hour to have a severe impact, even if that junction in its existing state is operating over capacity. So my stance is a little bit different to SAFELAG's stance, or my understanding of SAFELAG's stance, that if a junction is operating over capacity, then any development traffic through that would constitute a severe impact. That is not my stance in that regard. So I think the way that SISTRA have set it out and the way the council have agreed and Highways England have agreed, I think that is suitable and appropriate for the way the traffic impact assessments through the modelling has been undertaken. Secondly, A key element that has significant respect to that is location of development. So it is from a sustainability perspective, in the framework paragraphs 108 and 110 that refer to development in sustainable locations. So that's with respect to appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport. Those sites that will allow for greater use of sustainable modes of transport invariably occur in areas where traffic is generally more congested. That is the nature of development in suitable locations, and those suitable locations such as SA13, it is a sustainable location that can use public transport and promote public transport and improve the viability of public transport, that can improve and utilise the existing location and footway network and crossings for access to the rail station, etc., come into play its part in terms of where development is most suitably located. So that was my main view with respect to looking at severity in a little bit more detail with respect to the two key junctions that are close and have been referenced, that are close to SA13, that is junction 6, which is the existing roundabout of Keymar Road with Junction Road and Silverdale Road. It is logical and occurs in many, many places that a non-signalised junction that is at capacity gets turned into a signalised junction. Now, that may not at times fully mitigate the impact in the sense of queue and delay through a junction for vehicles, but it does have material benefits. So there are material benefits in terms of pedestrian safety, allowing pedestrians to cross, green lights, etc. And there is also the benefit that it allows the highway authority to provide green time to routes such as Keymar Road that it may want traffic to flow more freely, and therefore it can put a longer red time on a side road that has less impact if it queues. So there are material benefits to providing mitigation, even if they don't materially improve delay through the junction for just cars. With respect to the Keymar Road Folders Lane junction, so that's junction S27, the modelling that Sister undertook determined that the impact at that junction was not severe, it was significant. So it doesn't meet, in Sister and the Council's criteria, it doesn't meet a severe impact. So therefore, again, mitigation in that regard isn't required. Then Mr. New commented on the element of temporary growth in our analysis for matter 6, our representations, appendix 1. Now, our development took into account the Clayton Mills approved site to the south of SA13, and we agreed that with the council, with West Sussex, to undertake it in that regard. And furthermore, the Clayton Mills development specifically took into account other permitted sites. So there were some sites, and you'll see it in our appendix G, extracts of Clayton Mills development, that Clayton Mills took into account permitted development specifically, so not just through temporary. So temporary growth traffic, broadly speaking, so growth for background traffic, as Mr. New set out. However, we have accounted for very specific development, such as Clayton Mills itself, within our analysis. And what that does is it puts a higher volume of traffic on the network that we are assessing, due to the location of Clayton Mills being close by. So in that regard, albeit the Tempro wide growth is lower, the actual traffic that we've taken into account of makes up for that in the sense of the specifics of the detailed sites and the detailed traffic generation, distribution, and assignment of those specific development sites. So that's the way we set it out, and that's the way we've agreed with West Sussex, and that was the way Clayton Mills set it out for their approved planning application, and that's the route we took in that regard.
Is it right to say that you've updated Tempro in that you've looked at the full population or the full households rather than the criticism that was levelled at Tempro?
We have just used the full households and employments that were set out within Tempro. So with respect to Tempro, if Tempro needed to be updated to account for latest allocations, then we could do that. However, what we would also do is we would minus the households associated with the developments that we have taken on board specifically, such as Clayton Mills, because then that would avoid double counting those households.
So you're confident that the system you've used passes appropriate scrutiny?
I believe so. I haven't at this moment cross-referenced the numbers that Mr. New has set out. That would be a detailed exercise to do that and cross-reference the difference in housing and the additional volume of ground traffic that would require versus the specific site allocation traffic that we've taken into account of. So I wouldn't like to second guess the answer to that, but yes, we discussed this and scoped this with West Sussex County Council as would be expected. The methodology was agreed with West Sussex County Council, and they've responded to our representations, as you're aware.
The A23 improvements and the kind of east-west links around the science park, etc. Are you, how would you respond to the comments that were made by the traffic experts that in fact that was a critical element, and basically great concern was shown by them over that? What would be your response to that?
The reason that is a critical element is in association with the Science and Technology Park, and that's clearly set out in the Statement of Common Ground that the Council and Highways England have. It's set out within elements of SISTRA's modelling reports where they specifically look at junctions like junction S1 that is needed for the Science and Technology Park, not for SA12 and SA13. Our development is on the other side of the town to that. So yes, we will have some traffic that will route along the A2300 and will go to the A23 junction, but our impact on that, I wouldn't consider, and the council do not consider severe. The severity and the reason and the need for those improvements at the A23 junction and on the A2300 is associated with the Science and Technology Park.
And that's very helpful, thank you. I've got no further questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Muirhead. Thank you, sir. I will then move on to Roman number 6, which was living conditions of neighbouring occupiers. And I just wanted to respond to what Mr. Grace had to say on this. He referred, sir, as you'll recall, to the LVA that we've submitted, which is SA 13.1. And I will have to go back to that in due course in relation to the national park. But he referred expressly to paragraph 5.10 and following. And his point was that that the LVA identifies a visual impact on existing residential properties to the north and west of the site that ultimately reduces down to a moderate adverse impact with mitigating planting. So I highly doubt that you really need me to point out to you that that's simply what one expects from residential development in sustainable locations like this one, adjoining a built-up area. It's of course entirely commonplace for existing residents to be able to see their new neighbours. And I would question where houses are supposed to be built if they're not going to have this level of immediate visual impact on neighbouring residents, because it's clearly not preferable to build them in the middle of the countryside, for example, where immediate visual impacts on existing neighbouring residents could perhaps be avoided, but then those sites would be far less sustainable considering everything else. So that's what I have to say in response to that point. And other than that, the impact, so other than the impact on existing residential receptors to the north and to the west, paragraph 5.9, so the preceding paragraph of the LVA, explains in summary that the site is very well contained by the existing built-up area and well vegetated field boundaries with very few opportunities to view the site from its surroundings.
Okay.
So I then move on to landscape, so number 7 in the list, and I want to deal first, or really primarily, with obviously the national park, and I will need to take a little time presenting this, but I hope that it's helpful to you. The first point that I want to make is that you'll have seen, obviously, there are various maps before you that show the boundary of the national park in relation to the allocation. There's one at Appendix D to the LVA, so Appendix D to SA 13.1. And the point is that the site does not immediately abut the boundary of the national park, so there will remain a buffer. Paragraph 323 of our LVA identifies that at its closest point, the national park is approximately 140 metres to the southeast of the site, and importantly that is beyond Wellhouse Lane. So Wellhouse Lane intervenes between the park boundary and there's the park boundary, then there's Wellhouse Lane, and then there's a buffer of residential properties and the site. So Mr. Griffiths this morning said he was concerned about there being development right up to the national park boundary. Well, that's not what's proposed.
Thank you.
And importantly, so where the park boundary runs nearest to the site, there is already intervening existing residential development along Wellhouse Lane, which I say is significant both in respect of the National Park Authority's concern about the need for a transition, and also because its other key concern relates to the historical landscape character. So I do say that when we're considering how far those concerns ought to go, we need to bear in mind that there is already residential development along Wellhouse Lane between the park boundary and the site behind those houses.
Thank you.
So I turn then to the points that I want to make on our LVA, so on document SA 13.1. The first, and it is an obvious point, but I do say it's an important one, sir, is that the LVA was undertaken by a qualified landscape architect, and the methodologies set out in its Appendix H. The basis of the assessment, as you'd expect, is Glivia, the 3rd edition, and also Natural England's document and approach to landscape character assessment. It's the only such analysis that you have before you, sir, and the National Park Authority hasn't questioned the methodology, nor indeed has it questioned the factual conclusions set out in the LVA about what views there are available and from what distance those views are available.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try not to drag us through parts of this document unnecessarily, obviously, but just in terms of an overview, as you will have seen, section 2 goes through the relevant national and local planning policy, and that includes obviously the NPPF and the PPG, the Mid Sussex District Plan, and also the South Downs local plan as well. And then just one point of factual correction on what Mr. Grace said before the break. He referred to paragraph 318 and suggested that our consultants had observed that there was only capacity for limited development, and that's not our consultants' view. It's a view expressed by HDA in 2007. So just when you come to reflect on that, it wasn't quite accurately represented this morning. And then coming to the visibility of the site from the national park, I just highlight paragraphs 423 and 424, which address the views from the public footpath within the national park, one of which the site isn't visible from, and then another view where the site's not readily discernible in the views because essentially the footpath is some distance from the park. And accompanying those two paragraphs is photographs 23 and 24, which you'll find towards the back of the LVA. So I would invite you to revisit those in due course. And then paragraph 4.30 concludes that the site is extremely well contained in views from the surrounding area, including the sensitive landscape of the national park. So nobody disputes that the landscape of the national park is sensitive, but it's not, there isn't extensive, indeed there's very limited intervisibility between the site and the national park. And then at 4.32, the conclusion reached is that because of its physical containment, the site does not form an important component of the setting for the national park.
So you remind me of the paragraph number there?
That was 432, sir.
Thank you.
And similarly, it's 432, which observes that the site isn't covered by any landscape character or quality designations and isn't identified in local planning policy for character or landscape quality. So the conclusion reached in terms of landscape character value is that it is relatively pleasant farmland, but it's not, in the view of CSA, part of a valued landscape. And you'll find that conclusion at paragraph 433, sir. And then the next paragraph I would just draw your attention to is 435, where the consultants have considered the landscape history of the site. Because obviously, as I noted a moment ago, one of the things that the National Park Authority is concerned about is essentially the historic landscape features. Well, paragraph 435 acknowledges the landscape history of the site and the key historic landscape sensitivities. And then it's paragraph 436 through to 439, where you will find, sir, really 4 paragraphs. I'm not going to read them out, but 4 paragraphs that summarise the conclusion in terms of the setting of the South Downs National Park. And particularly, I would draw your attention to, within paragraph 437, there's a passage from the inspector who was considering the consented scheme for 73 homes north of the Ridgeview Wine Estate. And their view was that that appeal scheme would have no appreciable effect on the purposes for which the national park was designated, and no material harm to the landscape and scenic beauty of the national park, and therefore no conflict with the framework policies on national parks. So you'll see then at 438, there's generally a limit to the intervisibility between the national park and the southern edge of Burgess Hill. There's no intervisibility from within the site to the nearby edge of the national park because of the densely vegetated intervening land, and then an explanation of how the vegetation along the southern site boundary and the Wellhouse Lane properties provide a strong visual screen in that location and prevent any intervisibility. So as a result of all that, the site itself plays only a very limited role in contributing to the setting of the national park.
Could I just ask you a couple of questions on that? You say that there's no intervisibility because of the amount of existing vegetation primarily. Would your proposals or your client's proposals affect that so that removed vegetation would in fact open up views?
No, sir, that's not proposed. And I'll return to this. I mean, in short, our position is that particularly along Wellhouse Lane, where when you look at the plans and the maps, you'll see that there are already houses off that lane that intervene between us and Wellhouse Lane. So our position is that the southern boundary of the site is already very robust, but if necessary, we would be entirely happy to make that boundary more robust and to provide additional planting along that boundary if that were felt to be necessary.
My second and last question on this is, how can I put this? When you look from the national park to, say, from vantage points and the footpaths that you've mentioned towards your site, your client's site, do you see a backdrop that is a pristine backdrop, or do you see a backdrop which is an urbanized backdrop, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, sir, I hope the answer to that is in the next bit of the LVA that I was, and the final bit I think that I was going to turn up, which is
do carry on.
which is within the section on suitability of this site to accommodate development, and I'm just going to it now, 523 through to 525, which says specifically, because there is so 525 is probably most helpful to you, where it explains that views from the ridge line within the national park, including from Ditchling Beacon, look northwards towards the proposed development from a distance of around 4.5 kilometres. It's not anticipated that the new houses would be readily discernible to the naked eye. And then it goes on to explain that any anticipated views would be barely discernible and limited to glimpsed views of the roofs of the new houses, which will be seen in the context of the existing adjacent built-up area.
Thank you.
So, sir, the point I wanted to draw your attention to from those paragraphs, so from 523 to 525, is that the impact is assessed by the consultants as being negligible, adverse at worst.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the overall magnitude of effects on landscape character, you'll find that, so at paragraph 531, where the conclusion reached is that it's no greater than a negligible adverse and indirect effect on the landscape character of the national park. There was also expressed by one participant in their written submissions a concern that cumulative impacts between SA12 and SA13 hadn't been considered. You will find consideration of cumulative impacts under the heading cumulative effects, and that's at paragraph 549 and 550, where that's considered, and the conclusion reached is that even cumulatively with SA12, the overall effect is no greater than a negligible adverse indirect effect.
That was negligible adverse effect, was it?
Negligible adverse indirect effect, yeah.
Indirect, sorry. Thank you.
And so for the sort of ultimate conclusions, it's section 6 of the LVA, and particularly paragraph 6.6 and 6.7 are relevant to the national park. And the consultant's view is that the site is capable of accommodating development in line with that shown in the concept master plan and the landscape principles plan. And both of those follow later in the LVA document, without resulting in significant harm to the surrounding local landscape character or to views from the surrounding area, including the national park. So we don't agree with SOFLAG's assertion that the site has a very open landscape context. We say that the LVA evidence is completely convincingly that it doesn't, and also evidences that there aren't views of the national park that could be described as incredible. Just to pick up on one of the National Park Authority's concerns around historic landscape character, we don't accept that proposals for the allocation are not and have not been landscape led. And if in due course, sir, I could ask you to look at the concept master plan and the landscape principles plan, which are both appended towards the back of the LVA, you'll see that a number of, 2, I think it is, historic hedgerows are suggested to be reinstated as part of the design for the scheme. So those are historic landscape features that have been lost, but that we're proposing could be reinstated as part of the allocation.
That's 2 rows of hedgerows, yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And my other point was really one that I already made in response to, I think, your first question. The density of the red line is 19.7 dph, and as I've explained, we say there is already a very strong boundary along the south of the site, so we don't think it's necessary, but if the alternative view was arrived at, then it would certainly be possible to have a stronger landscape buffer along that southern boundary. But there's no basis, we say realistically, for calling into question the capacity of the site to accommodate the quantum of dwellings proposed, given the assessment provided in the LVA. And the final thing I just wanted to do in relation to the national parks there was to look at the specific requirements of policy DP18 of the district plan. So the first of those is that development within the setting, or development within land that contributes to the setting of the national park, should only be permitted where it doesn't detract from or cause detriment to visual and special qualities, tranquility and essential characteristics. Well, first of all, you'll have seen our point about the limited contribution that this site realistically makes to the setting, but also we say that the negligible effects of the scheme, in terms of it having only negligible adverse effects on the national park, means that it can't be said to detract from or to cause detriment to any of the factors that are listed in the policy. And I do say, sir, that if the approach were taken to policy DP 18, whereby even a negligible adverse effect was somehow contrary to this part of the policy, that wouldn't be consistent with the approach in national policy in the NPPF, which doesn't take such an absolute approach to development within the setting of a national park. And then in particular, the policy says that development should not adversely affect transitional open green spaces between the site and the boundary of the South Downs National Park. Well, as I've explained, there will still be a transitional space between the allocation and the park boundary. And there's no reason to think that that transitional space would be adversely affected by the development. And then the remainder of the policy says that there should be consistency with the purposes of the national park and not significant harm to the park or its setting. And again, for the reasons I've summarised our position is that there is consistency with the purposes of the national park, and there certainly wouldn't be significant harm or no harm to the national park itself, and not significant harm, indeed at most negligible harm to the setting of the national park.
Thank you.
So that's the national parks there. And then on ecology, we have submitted, I just need to remind myself of what the number of the document is. We submitted our ecology report in the examination library. It's SA 13 point. Sorry, I can't recall which number that is. I'll remind myself at the end if I may, but you'll have seen it anyway, sir. That's 13.2, thank you, I thought it was. But so essentially all I really wanted to say about that was obviously SOFLAG have made the point that they've obtained data from the Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre with the list of protected species. And so when you do, if you've not had a chance already, but when you do consider document 13.2, that's based on a desk study and on a site survey. And the short point is that it concludes, having considered quite very carefully actually the potential for protected habitats and particularly protected species to be on the site. It considers all of that in quite some detail, and it reaches the conclusion that there aren't any overriding ecological constraints to development of the site, and that it could deliver biodiversity net gain overall. So we are well aware of the ecological and biological potential of the site. But there's nothing certainly that has been identified at this stage that's anything approaching a showstopper from an ecological perspective.
Thank you.
And then on heritage, the only point I wanted to respond on was one that was made by Andrew Black Consulting on behalf of Vanderbilt Homes, where there's a suggestion in the hearing statement that our heritage statement, which is document 13.3, there's a suggestion from this respondent that any mitigation still requires further consideration, and it's said that it's unclear whether this will have an impact on the deliverability of the site or the eventual capacity for development. I don't accept that as an accurate representation of what our heritage statement, so what document 13.3 shows. It clearly, what it does is it identifies that High Chimneys has high significance in heritage terms, but that the wider setting, which is the setting of which the site forms a small part, provides a secondary and minor level of contribution to that heritage significance. And then the reasoning is worked through as one would expect to identify that bringing forward the allocation be likely to result in less than substantial harm, likely towards the lower end of that spectrum. And I would particularly ask you, sir, to have regard to paragraph 4.6, where the author of the heritage assessment, as I read it, it is not saying that there's any doubt around what might eventually be found or that there's any doubt over deliverability. They're simply saying that the assessment reached at this stage will need to be sort of checked again and revisited in due course, which is entirely what one would expect, certainly at the plan making stage.
Thank you.
And then moving on to sustainability and the location of the site, if I may, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Mike Ruddock from Pegasus Group, just to address the point around schools, which was raised this morning.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mike Ruddock from Pegasus Group. It was just in terms of, I think it was Mr. Black that made the point. We weren't entirely sure if it was about SA12 or SA13 regarding walking distances from the site to facilities, including schools. Just to confirm, I myself actually walked the distance from Broadlands, which is the southernmost point of access to the site from Keema Road. And it is 10 minutes walk to the primary school, and it's 15 minutes walk to the station and the town centre beyond, along existing lit footways along both Kemah Road and also from the access along Folders Lane. Therefore, in
you
my
describe yourself as an Olympic class.
I'd probably march it a bit quicker than some people, but in my view, the distances set out by the council in the draft policy are and their response to your questions are entirely accurate.
So primary school was 10 minutes, and you said 15 minutes to.
It's 15 minutes to the station, and then the station leads the town centre beyond. So it's about the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ruddock. And the only other point, I think, in terms of considerations more generally, obviously our position is that we say that the evidence that we've submitted does establish quite clearly that the allocation is sound. On the issue of alternative sites, you'll have seen, sir, it's within our hearing statement for this matter, for matter 3, at paragraph 4.2 and following, we explain what our timescales are and our intention around building out the site. So again, probably an obvious point, but hopefully I can be forgiven it if it were necessary, because this allocation had been deleted, to look for alternative ways of accommodating the quantum of development, then it seems to me those would be likely to be slower to come forward than we intend to build out this site.
Thank you.
So, sir, I hope that I've covered off everything in terms of questions that you may have had for the promoters following this morning's session, but obviously if there's anything else, I'll try and assist.
Just have a look at my notes. Do you have any response to the comments from the Sussex Wildlife Trust that were quoted by those who are against development of this site?
So no, not specifically. I have seen those and I'm aware of them. Having read the ecological statement that we've submitted, it seems to me that it does a perfectly robust job of, identifying the ecological interest of the site. And I can't see any reason to question what that statement says about the ability of all of that to be dealt with in due course at the application stage.
In terms of the impact caused at the construction stage, how would you classify that in terms of severity or otherwise?
Sorry, so the impact caused to ecological issues?
Just the general impact in terms of the impact on residents in the area.
If I may, sorry, sir, I've understood that. If I may, I'm not going to attempt that as a barrister, but I am going to invite Mr. Ruddock to provide you his view, which will be much more helpful than anything that I could say about that, I'm sure. So, Mr. Ruddock, if you could pop back up again, please.
Sure, thank you, sir. Just in terms of construction stage, it would, as with any urban extension, any planning application that goes in on the edge, on a sustainable site on the edge of settlement adjoining other houses, there will be an impact at the construction stage that will be mitigated via the planning application process, via construction management plan, noise impact assessments, which will be dealt with at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, just to add that, yes, there will obviously, or there would obviously be a construction management plan conditioned as well, one would expect.
Right, I got that point down. That's helpful. Is that your case now presented, or have you?
That is, yeah, that's certainly everything from me for now.
Okay, before I bring the council in, I notice I've got 2 hands that have gone up. One from Andrew Black and one from Dr. Ashley Bowes. So I'll take Andrew Black first.
Thank you, sir. Just responding on one point of order here from the what was mentioned by the gentleman from Pegasus, avoiding any back and forth and wanting to play the ball, not the man here. But those distances that I gave you are set out in the transport statement, which has been provided as the evidence base for this. They are in paragraph 6.1.3, which sets out that it's a 16-minute walk or 1.3 kilometres. I would also say, sir, that having done the school run for many years with primary school children, it is a 16-minute walk if you're lucky, if you've got various kids in tow and pushing a buggy. So I think we've got to push that those are the right times that have been set out. And I continue to say that they are, in other instances, the secondary school, the mixed secondary school, is outside the preferred maximum. So I'll just put it there, and I think it's worth rebutting. Thank you.
And I'll bring Dr. Oshibose in now, please.
Thank you, sir. Just points arising out of my learned friend's presentation of her case for the promoter. We've just got 5 short points we'd like to come back on, if we may.
Right.
We'll attempt to do those as quickly as we can. I'm not sure we'll be able to do it all within 10 minutes, but it won't be much longer than that. So, first point on coalescence. Ms. Sargent made the point about Wellhouse Lane, that there are some existing properties to the south of the proposed allocations. And I just wanted to invite Mr. Grace to give you his view about really the relevance of those properties in their size and scale when you're considering a coalescence question for a development of 300 units. Mr. Grace, do you want to just give the inspector your view about that?
Firstly, Inspector, can you hear me clearly now?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a start. I would also very much ask you, if you have not been down Wellhouse Lane, that as part of any future site visits, please do travel down Wellhouse Lane. Wellhouse Lane is characterised by circa 10 houses, a single lane, circa 400 metres in length, sporadic residential properties, arguably in large, spacious plots. It has a rural character, and in that sense, it has a very different feel to the northern edge of SA13, which is arguably defined by a suburban stroke urban edge. So in terms of containment, and Wellhouse Lane being a strong line of physical containment with regards to SA13, I have to say that I don't agree with that point, and I would respectfully ask that you make your own judgment. If you haven't already been down Wellhouse Lane, I would ask that you do that, because it is, I think, a significant point. With regards to
I was just dealing with coalescence at that point, Mr. Grace. I know you've got another point on landscape, but I'll take them in the order that they were taken under the subheadings for the inspector's note. So the next 3 points are under highways. The second point is there does appear to be, before you, sir, a difference of opinion as to how you construe paragraph 109 of the framework. And that appears from Mr. Muirhead told you that in his view, his opinion, that you should focus on the difference between the existing situation and then the with development situation. And we don't agree with that. We think that's the wrong interpretation. And you may be assisted by, there is an appeal decision which deals with that point. That's not before the examination, but I simply draw that to your attention because in the reference, it concerns land at Kidnappers Lane, Leckhampton, Cheltenham. Kidnappers Lane, Leckhampton, Cheltenham, 5th of May, 2016.
Leckhampton
Lane,
Cheltenham.
Kidnappers Lane, Leckhampton, Cheltenham. That was important because it was a recovered appeal decision. So the Secretary of State recovered it, considers the inspector's application of the policy and agrees with it. And it was also important because it was legally challenged on the inspector's interpretation of what was then para 32 of the framework, and Mr. Justice Holgate, planning liaison judge, dismissed that as unarguable. And in that appeal decision, at paragraph 235, the inspector tackled this exact point. And he said, the second observation I make is that even the County Highway Authority expects the measures proposed in this appeal to be effective only in reducing the residual cumulative impact of the development to less than severe compared with what would happen anyway. That is not the correct test. Since the A46 Sherdingham Road is already overloaded, the development should not be permitted unless effective mitigation measures are taken to relieve or counter the existing overloading of Sherdingham Road. And his particular opinion there is then endorsed or accepted by the Secretary of State at para 14 in his covering decision letter. And as I said, that was subject to an unsuccessful legal challenge on a whole host of grounds, but including the application of paragraph 32 of the framework now replicated in para 109. So we do not accept that that is the correct approach, and we say we derive some support from your colleague Inspector Clark's view at Leckhampton, endorsed of course by the Secretary of State and the Planning Court. Two other points on highways before I turn to my final point on landscape. You were told, well, in answer to your question, sir, Mr. Muirhead, as I understood him, was saying that he hadn't updated the tempo model. What he'd done is simply interrogated it. And so any underscoring as to what the development-based scenario was would have been rolled out in his model. He hasn't done that update, as I understood his response to you. And the second point was that the A23 improvements, he said, well, those are really strictly limited to the science park and its deliverability and acceptability. They've got nothing to do with these sites. And I just wanted to give Mr. New the opportunity to give you his view now he's heard that evidence about that. So, Mr. New, are you there? Can you hear us? It's not there.
Don't tell me he's stuck in traffic trying to get here.
No. Oh, he is there. Hello, Mr. Very
I'm
nice.
here.
Relieved to see you. Very nice to see you. Two points, Mr. New.
Yes, can you hear me?
Of course. Yes. I can hear you perfectly.
Right.
So the first point is that in response to your observation that the Tempro model dealt with a lower base development scenario than as proposed in the site allocations DPD, Mr. Muirhead, for the promoter, accepted that. He said, oh, I haven't updated the Tempro model. What do you think about that? Is that a robust evidence base for the inspector to take his decision on?
Not when the difference between Tempro's forecasts and the inclusion of 16,000 houses in the local plan is so large.
And what's the Tempro one again? Just remind the inspector of that.
The Tempro figure is over the period 2014 to 2031, which is the local plan period 13305, whereas the local plan growth is 16390. This is for the district as a whole.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And you've given
those
your
two figures again, Mr. New, please. Just so I've got them absolutely right. So the difference is
the difference is Tempro includes over the local plan period 13,305 new dwellings.
Okay.
Tempro actually works in households, but assuming of one household per.
Don't worry about
that. Whereas the local plan includes for 16,390.
Right, okay.
Thank you. There's a significant deficit there. The other aspect on the modelling undertaken in support of SA13 is that it cannot possibly take account of the widespread redistribution of traffic that would result from the A23, A2300 mitigation measures. And the important thing to understand about those measures are that there are actually two sets of improvement measures included in the mitigation strategy. One addresses the issue of lack of capacity as a result of southbound traffic leaving the A23. And that, as I understand it, is being resolved with Science and Technology Park promoters by means of a dedicated slip, which would avoid that traffic having to use the roundabout on the A2300 just to the east of the A23. Secondly, there's the issue of inadequate capacity southbound on the A23 itself from that junction down to the B2188 junction, which has the knock-on impact of causing excessive delays on the slip onto the A23 from the A2300. Now, that's nothing to do with the Science and Technology Park. It's everything to do with the need for that section of A23, which is currently only 2 lanes wide, to be improved to 3 lanes wide. And it's that mitigation which is included within the DPD mitigation strategy in all the modelling which was done by SISTRA. And it's that mitigation which the SISTRA report stresses is critical to providing sufficient capacity on that north-south route to avoid the issue which there is at present and which will continue into the future of excessive demand on all the alternative north-south routes, which include Kemah Road, includes the A273 through Stonetown Crossroads, includes the B2114 through Ditchling, and includes, as I say, the extension of Kemah Road south through to Kemah. All of those roads, even with the mitigation strategy, still experience high levels of traffic, still experience congestion, overcapacity at critical junctions, such as Stonetown Crossroads, and closer to SA13, junction S6 to the north.
Given that, Mr. New, this takes me to my 4th point rather nicely. Given what you've just said, do you agree with Mr. Muirhead when he told the inspector that the A23 improvements are really only relevant to the science park and they have no real relevance to SA12 and 13?
No, not at all. As I stressed, there are 2 elements to that improvement. One is associated with the science park, that's being dealt with. The other isn't. And it involves the delivery of a widening to A23, which isn't in Highways England's programme, isn't in their forward programme for the next 5-year road investment strategy, and for which there is no identified funding mechanism in the DPD.
Thank you, Mr. New. Is there anything else you wanted to tell the inspector about in response only to what Mr. Muirhead had to say?
Well, just the point that Mr. Muirhead stressed that typically when you've got a junction which is operating over capacity, the addition of 1 or 2 additional vehicles would not have a material effect and would normally not be considered to be severe. We're not talking here about the addition of 1 or 2 additional vehicles at the critical junctions that we've identified. We're talking about the addition of significantly more and with an increase in the amount of overcapacity as a consequence.
Thank you very much, Mr. New. 5th point, landscape, then. So a short point on this. Ms. Sargent drew attention to what she derived from the evidence was that there was a strong southern boundary. You'll recall her saying that, based in her view on the evidence. I'm just going to ask Mr. Grace whether he agrees that there's a strong southern boundary.
Thank you again, sir. The answer is no. And we're being told, I believe, that we should not worry about the setting of the national park, as SA13 would not be cheek and jowl next to it. Well, it may not physically abut it, but we've been told it will be circa 140 metres away beyond Wellhouse Lane. In real world terms, that's just a little bit longer than a football pitch. And I would say that this is a very limited buffer to an area of national significance and importance, and therefore my judgment is that it is not a sufficient buffer to protect the setting of the South Downs National Park as per DP 18. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grayson. The final point, sir. Sorry, I've strayed just over one, but the final point is this. Ms. Sargent told you that if you were in the position of looking at alternatives, well, this site can deliver quickly, so her clients tell her. But of course, quick delivery is not necessarily critical in this issue because there is already a robust supply in the form of the 20 constant sites without going to these. So with respect, we don't accept that this is a situation where the quick delivery of this site militates in its favour. If you were to find that there were adverse effects which rendered them unsound, you could find them unsound with the comfort of knowing that there would be a robust land supply which the council has identified in its 20 constant sites in the meantime, and it could do that either by updating the DPD or it could do it through the review, a point I made to you originally. So thank you very much. Those are our points. If I can help you with any questions, I can, but thank you for allowing us to put our case.
Thank you. We'll have a break now and we will come back at 2 o'clock. Right, thank you. And we have to log out before logging back in again.